come in on such a glorious Friday afternoon.
Yes,
right, we're going to just jump straight in. This is going to be dealt with in, obviously, as we usually do, two separate meetings. We're starting with the AGM papers. If that's okay. So if we kick off the AGM, do we have any apologies for absence?
No.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Seems a good, but probably for me around the development cooperation processes / stepping down as chairman.
Yes, that's an item for the chair.
Yeah, probably won't have to do that again, but I think there's a bit of a transition in there, so I'll at least register an interest for that. And the Freeport board as well.
Vice Chair of the TVCA, Free Board.
Yeah, and there's TVC, Councillor for item 4, and also for item 4, possibly Councillor Harrison and then Cook.
Yeah.
And then for item 5, STDC again with Councillor Brown, again with Councillor Harrison, again Mayor Cook.
Right. Very good. Is that everything? I think it is. Okay, brilliant. This is the previous AGM, if anybody can remember that far back. Has anybody seen any corrections or errors or typos? No? People happy to agree the minutes? Yeah, thank you. And then if we move on to the governance and appointments paper, I'm sure people will have seen that part of that, some of that paper is confidential for now. I think we'll take the item as read. But I think Tom, you wanted to add a few things, didn't you, to it?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so there was quite a lot in there. I just wanted to pull out a few points. So, firstly, you'll see in there's a section on strengthening the role of portfolio holders. So this is something we've been talking about. You'll see the report is seeking a delegation to me to agree those with your unanimous approval. We're really keen to obviously get those agreed so we can start to move forward with a new way of working. So I just wanted to highlight that, and that's obviously a key strand in the organisation improvement plan. Also, just to pick up the section around the business board, so you'll see that the chair and 3 members are stepping down. So on behalf of the Combined Authority, I just wanted to put on record our thanks to Siobhan McArdle, who's completed 2 terms as chair. You'll see in there we're proposing to undertake an external recruitment process for the chair and the new board members. Obviously, we need to ensure that the appropriate skills and sector representation is on that board in line with the new local growth plan, ensure we've got the right coverage across the board. And also need to consider the business board terms of reference and how they dovetail with the wider Combined Authority governance. So you'll see in there that we're proposing to run that process and bring that all back to a cabinet in September. And then the last thing I was going to pick up is you'll see in there's a proposal to do a full review of the Constitution, which again is in action in the proposed organisation improvement plan. I think obviously the Constitution was obviously developed when the Combined Authority was formed. There's been various iterations of it, but I think the time is now right for a full review to make sure it's fit for purpose as we move forward.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tom. Any comments or questions on item 4? Chris?
Just to make sure that it doesn't drift too far, can I suggest that the portfolios are addressed immediately after this meeting, if everyone has availability. I'm just conscious that I don't want to continue to go on and on and on.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose really, Chris, it's subject to everybody agreeing on the new portfolios, and then, yeah, if people could find time immediately afterwards to be able to confirm that, that would be helpful. And it would also be helpful because if we're also going into the recruitment of the chair of the business board, whoever's leading that portfolio should be involved in that interview process, and there's a few things like that. And also, if we can get this agreed, there's obviously a better alignment with the new senior management of the Combined Authority, so with assigned directors to a portfolio. I think we've talked informally about this, but getting leaders to present their portfolio to Cabinet rather than it all being done centrally through me, I think again helps just kind of change the dynamic and the way of working at the Combined Authority as well. So, yeah, so is that okay? Do people maybe have 10-15 minutes afterwards? We'll pick that up afterwards. Yeah. Okay, people happy to agree item 4? Oh, sorry, Fred, did you have something? You did have your hand up.
So are we talking in item 4 about the appointments of the chairs to the DCs?
Yes.
So can I bring something up there? So just for clarity, is this on?
Is it flicked up?
It's on.
Can you hear me?
Is it flicked up at the switch? The top switch.
Can Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
That's a bit better.
Just for clarity, I sent an objection to the monitoring officer in terms of the process of how the chairs for the development corporations have been chosen. I got a response from the chief exec, and I thank you for that. I'm still not particularly convinced that the process was correct, or can I put it this way, I think the process is flawed, and I think it's flawed on a level that is actually going against what we're trying to do as a Tees Valley Combined Authority in working together collaboratively, and I feel that, and this is nothing personal, so I'll be very generic, but I think that the appointment of the chairs by the mayor, which it is a mayoral appointment, just needs to be looked at. I think we need to look at the constitution. I agree that we need a full meeting or workshop on the constitution. I think we need to look at where we're standing as an authority. We've done a lot of work over recent months to try and improve working relations and improve the working together, and the appointment of these chairs, to me, just goes against that.
Okay, thanks, Brenda. I mean, I'll just make a couple of comments in that the law itself is very clear that it's a mayoral appointment, which I appreciate you accept. I mean, there's potentially a wider conversation in feeding back to government if people are unhappy with that particular right for the mayor to have, to be able to change the law, but the law as it stands is the law. I think, from my point of view, I was trying to exercise that mayoral power in a much more collegiate way than the law requires. So, I didn't have to go through a process, I didn't have to involve anyone in that decision making, but I did communicate at the start of the process and before we started the process that we wanted to try and make sure that there was buy-in from across the areas where the development corporations were, which is why we had a transparent applications process with an objective criteria. We had obviously various chief executives sitting on each of the development corporation panels, along with either the chief executive of STDC and the chief operating officer of the two development corporations in Middlesbrough and Hartlepool. Again, I have no concern with raising that and bringing that up as part of the full constitutional review, and we can get into the detail of that for you, Brenda. And yeah, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but I feel like it was wrong.
I do, and I think as well, can I just ask, because doing a bit of reading, I'm under the impression that whenever you have a function to perform, as it were, as mayor, excuse me, you need permission from the Secretary of State, is that correct? Or?
No.
No, you don't.
It's certain functions, so for example, although it's changing under the devolution bill, for example, setting up things like a development corporation requires an interaction with the Secretary of State. There are various powers like that where there is interaction with a Secretary of State or central government, but the legislation...
But not for various functions.
But not for a lot of functions. And indeed, things like, for example, setting a mayoral budget, which we've never done because obviously never raised the levy or a precept locally. That obviously doesn't have to involve central government, but it does actually have to involve cabinet, and there's a challenge process within cabinet. So basically, different powers require different things. I suppose to give clarity on this specific power, that it is a mayoral power, and a mayoral power standalone by itself that doesn't require consultation or approval or involvement of any third party. And again, I think the paper sets that out quite clearly.
Well, I've read something different, but I may have misinterpreted what I've read.
I can defer to officers.
So I'm looking at what Tom sent me as far as in response, and he sent something from the 2009 Act.
Yeah.
And that looked at the functions of the mayor, which were general, and then if you read on to 107DA, under procedure for direct conferral of general functions on the mayor, it does say at number 2 that the Secretary of State may make the order only if a request for making of the order has been made to the Secretary of State by the mayor. So am I misinterpreting that?
Yeah, I think that means where there is a requirement to make a referral to the Secretary of State, that provision kicks in.
But there isn't a requirement.
There isn't a requirement for every mayoral power decision to be referred to the Secretary of State, and so you have to cross-read the 2009 Act with various other acts which compile different mayoral powers,
Right.
which is complex and confusing, which is why we tried to set that out. Sorry, Emma, did you want to add something?
So it's the confusion comes from the different bits of legislation you've got to read in the right order. So the order, the Tees Valley Combined Authority order, functions order, that's what confers those functions onto our mayor.
Right. And is that all part of the Constitution?
So that's what the law says, to be read in that order.
Right.
I think that what this paper, I think it's important to understand what this paper is doing as opposed to what the appointment of chairs paper is doing. So what this does, the government's appointments paper, is it amends the constitution to align with the law, following the guidance from government around mayoral development corporations. Right. So it is seeking approval or ratification from cabinet to the development corporation constitutions which have been approved at the development corporation boards, and it's seeking approval from cabinet around the TVCA constitution in that respect. The appointment of the chairs, the notice from the mayor is in a separate paper. But yes, the law read in order confers those functions on that.
Thank you.
And we can provide more information and training on that.
So I do think that this reflects the need for a lot more training and going into the nitty-gritty of what exactly is going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that full constitutional review as well, so we can make sure all local authorities and leaders are taking on that journey to be able to feed into what that new constitution needs to look like, taking into account what the law sets out, and also the new legislation that's coming down the road is part of the government's curve, both in the infrastructure bills, strangely enough, and also the devolution bill that's coming will further change those powers. So any constitutional change or constitutional review will also have to reflect various acts of parliament that have just in the last week or two been introduced to parliament that haven't yet gone through the parliamentary process. So it will take some time because of the changes in devolution. And I suppose one of the things that the organisation will have to look at is how it continues to monitor that. As devolution continues to accelerate, there'll be further changes, which means that at some point the constitution will always be amended and evolved because of the devolution that comes down the line that we're not even aware of it.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Brenda. Appreciate that feedback. Stephen.
Apologies to delay the point, but I did go down a rabbit hole last night trying to understand the legislation, which I should never do because I'm not a lawyer. Did you comment on the fact that we may revisit the Constitution more broadly?
Yes.
So when I was looking at it, I think I found where your email was pointing out in terms of the legislation that describes this. My understanding of what I was reading is that whilst what's in the papers today is being suggested is something that we can do, but it wasn't a necessity, and my reading of it was a choice. And we could do it, but we didn't have to do it. And therefore...
So I think the position is that because the Constitution was communicated incorrectly over the last 2 or 3 years, the guidance that this government put out only a few months ago clarifies that position and shows that the position that we are in as a constitution is unlawful and was unlawful at the time it was adopted. So we have to correct it back to the lawful position before we can then look at the wider constitution and how the organisation wants to apply that power.
Right, because the phrasing I came across was something like the mayor may arrange rather than the mayor must arrange, which I took to me was an option or a choice rather than...
No, so when you read through all the different pieces of legislation, it is a mayoral power and the mayor can choose to do various things with it. So the mayor could choose to confer that power onto other individuals or parts of the organisation.
Right.
In relation to the corporation chair appointments.
But there is a restriction on the delegation in respect of chair appointments.
Yeah.
Right, I'll catch Emma afterwards because, as I said, I'm not a solicitor, so I may just be misreading it, but my understanding is...
So as part of the Tees Valley review, one of the recommendations that was a government recommendation, which ended up taking them over a year to respond to, because that was the amount of work that had to be put into looking at how the different pieces of legislation relate to each other, resulted in the guidance that was issued a number of months ago. So there is, the other recommendation that government haven't fulfilled, and I suspect probably won't fulfil in the short term, was in effect to pass a new piece of legislation to completely tidy up what the devolution law is. They're not doing that, which is why they issued the guidance rather than kind of re-looking at a simple bill that would bring all of those different parts together. Because you also have to read, we're going off on a tangent here slightly, but you also have to read, for example, some of the GLA in the London mayoral legislation that cross-references with combined authorities as part of a foundation that then combined authorities have been built on. And yeah, it's definitely a patchwork. But like I say, what this does is it brings us into line with the law and the guidance that the government have recently issued. But again, exactly this, the questions that are being raised are absolutely fair and appropriate, which is why, as part of this, we're looking at a full constitutional review that makes it much clearer on a local basis, and then the training in parallel with that can be provided so everybody around the table understands whose constitutional responsibilities what the decision-making responsibilities are, and who's involved in what process. And then going beyond that, where the scrutiny lies behind that around how decisions are challenged or referred either locally or into central government, etc., etc. So that's a piece of work that has to be done, and that's largely as a result of the patchwork that our constitution has become over the years. Again, as more devolution has come down the line over the last 8 years, which is why Tom has rightly pointed out now is the right time to have a full review of that. Try and clean up and simplify the constitution as much as possible.
Yeah, and just to be clear, that review will be done collaboratively with Cabinet, with your monitoring officers, to make sure that we go almost back to basics and look at it with a fresh pair of eyes and pick up probably a whole raft of issues that we need to work through, particularly in terms of the new legislation that's coming.
Could I just add to that it's just a shame that this didn't come beforehand, because I just think the timing of this and the way that it's been done is it is not quite as open and collaborative as we would have liked.
Yeah, well, I'm disappointed to feel that way though, Brenda, because this process has gone through the development corporations, which have also ratified these changes, both at the Hartlepool Development Corporation and the Middlesbrough Development Corporation. So we'll take it on board, we'll look at it as part of the review, and we'll note comments, Brenda. Thank you. Any others? No? Okay. So unless there's anything else, are people happy to agree with the recommendations in item 4? Yep. Yep, okay. We'll move on to item 5. We'll take it as read, unless anybody has any comments or questions. Or Tom, is there anything you want to add to that? Emma, is there anything you want to add to that? Okay. People are happy to note the approved recommendations in item 5? Yep. Thank you. And then we'll move on to item 6. So this is part of the review and then the subsequent guidance that apparently some of the extreme detail in the legislation, kind of following on from what you just talked about, Brenda, is every year, technically, apparently I, as an individual, should be presenting a report to review whether each of the development corporations that I've set up should continue. We haven't done that because it just seemed blindingly obvious that they should continue, but I suppose given the review and what we're trying to do to tidy everything up, there is a formal paper that needs to come to Cabinet with an explanation as to why I believe that the South Tees Development Corporation should continue in its current form. If anybody has any comments or questions on that, happy to take them. So if not, we'll be happy to note that report. And then secondly, for the Middlesbrough Development Corporation, the same thing for the rationale and the reason to continue the Development Corporation. Has anybody got any comments or questions on that? Chris?
I know this is currently being worked on, but I think the sooner we get to a new form of working for the Middlesbrough Development Corporation, the better it will be. I think originally when it was set out, there was stuff like the blanket transfer of assets, and I think as we've gone along, I think everyone's in agreement that stuff like that comes up, and all of a sudden it doesn't seem as good to just transfer assets and have liabilities moving around. So I think the sooner that we can sort of set a new position on some of those legacy stuff would be really appreciated.
Yeah, and that's something that's started to be discussed, and I think has been discussed at least hopefully in an early phase with you, Chris, with Dev's looking to pick that up as well and see how we can move that forward more collegially, and that's something in particular the new chair of the Development Corporation has been tasked with, to make sure that it reflects both what the combined authority wants to achieve for Middlesbrough and also dovetails in with what you and the council want to achieve for Middlesbrough as well. Tom, did you want to add something?
Yeah, obviously we've already discussed this, Chris, haven't we? And Eric and I had a good session last week, and I think it's really important that we get this master plan right for the next 3 to 5 years, which will absolutely make sure that we pick up those points.
Okay, thank you. We know that paper then, and we'll move on to the third, which is Hartlepool Development Corporation. Same rationale, same reason for bringing the report. Has anybody got any comments or questions on item 8? No? Okay. People happy to know the report? Thank you. And then we'll move on to dates for future meetings that are sent out there. We've now got dates in everybody's diaries. Hopefully that's been communicated with everybody, by the way. We've worked with each of the teams, so that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. It should be in all of your diaries now for the next 12 months. Brilliant. On that, we will close the AGM.